It begins not with a bang, but with a quiet withdrawal. You cease the pursuit of eyes and approval. You no longer offer your soul for interpretation to those who never intended to comprehend it. You stop leaking your essence into the dry wells of other people's opinions, and in that stillness, something shifts. You assume you've become invisible, but the opposite occurs. You become a subject of quiet, intense study, not because you demanded an audience, but because you transformed. You stopped begging for a seat at the table and simply built your own. And people notice the sound of that construction. They notice because you stand differently. You speak less, yet your words carry the weight of things unsaid for years. You move through rooms with a new economy of motion, energy reserved, directed inward. This unsettles the atmosphere. Here is the unspoken truth. When you begin to align your life with your own values, when you tidy the internal chaos even a little, when you stop handing out blame for your pain and start holding it yourself, you become a disturbance to those who refuse the same work. Your existence becomes a mirror, and mirrors are brutally honest. They don't reflect fantasy. They reflect the road not taken, the strength not summoned, the truth not faced. That is why you can silence a room without uttering a word. You enter and the social temperature flickers. Glances, quick and assessing, track you when you pretend not to notice. Conversations subtly reroute. It isn't about arrogance or volume. It's about predictability or the lack thereof. You are no longer a reactive instrument, playing the expected notes when pressed. You have become ungovernable by the old currencies of guilt, obligation, or the desperate hunger to be liked. This terrifies those whose worlds are built on social permission. Your modest improvement poses a violent, silent question to them. If they can change, why can't I? That question is a seismic tremor to the psyche. To avoid its upheaval, people cope. They dissect you with gossip, cloak their unease in mockery, project their stagnation onto your progress. They watch, hawk-like, hoping for a stumble, a return to the familiar shape that made their own complacency comfortable. The world operates on a silent pact. Stay small, stay confused, stay predictable, and you will be accepted. The moment you revoke your signature, the moment you stop apologizing for the space you occupy, you shatter that collective trance. And you are not ignored. You are monitored because a threat to shared complacency is a threat to be assessed. The fascinating part, you didn't become harsh. You became disciplined. You began telling the truth first and fiercest to yourself. You stopped confusing vulnerability with indiscriminate transparency. You ceased reacting to every provocation, every bait. The very people who once looked through you now can't look away. Because silence, when it is full and chosen, is deafening. When you no longer need to declare who you are, people are forced to wonder, and uncertainty is deeply unnerving. They would prefer a loud, known enemy to a calm, self-possessed puzzle. You trigger not because you are cruel, but because you embody a dangerous idea, responsibility. You are living proof that chaos can be ordered, that suffering can be metabolized into strength, that excuses are ultimately a choice. And so the observation begins. They parse your tone for cracks, replay your words for hidden meanings. They mistake your boundaries for arrogance, your calm for calculation, your self-respect for hostility. Not because it's true, but because accepting the alternative would demand they change. This attention is not admiration, nor is it hatred. It is a form of heightened, uneasy awareness. You've crossed a psychological threshold. You are no longer background static. You become a reference point, a living benchmark they must now subconsciously measure themselves against. Your restraint disturbs them more than your past anger ever did. Your anger was predictable. It gave them a map of your pressure points. Your explanations were a script they could dismiss. Now you pause, you choose, you walk away from what violates your peace. This quiet sovereignty forces others to fill the silence with their own insecurities. Your growth highlights their stasis. Your composure underscores their internal disorder. And instead of inquiring how you built it, they watch, hoping you'll collapse so they can be absolved from the effort of trying. This is the tax on becoming solid. You forfeit invisibility. You lose the cozy camouflage of being underestimated. In return, you gain a currency that cannot be counterfeited, self-respect. This respect isn't sourced from applause. It springs from the knowledge that you are finally carrying your own weight in the world. If people are tracking you now, it's because you've become consequential. Your choices ripple. Your presence exerts a gentle, unavoidable gravity. You are no longer easy to manipulate, and this unnerves those who rely on the disorder of others to justify their own lack of direction. So do not shrink. Do not soften your edges to restore their comfort. Do not misinterpret this surveillance for rejection. It is a signal. You have stepped onto a stage you didn't know you were building. Let them watch. Let them analyze. Let them misunderstand if they must. Your mandate is not to be palatable. It is to be intact. It is to be disciplined. It is to become someone you could meet in the mirror 5 years from now and recognize with quiet pride. Achieve that, and you won't need to proclaim your strength. The air will hum with it, and the watching will continue. The shift originates in a subtle, serious decision. You stop orienting your compass toward the fickle north of applause. You quit scanning faces for validation. You no longer edit your tone, your beliefs, or your borders merely to preserve a fragile peace. This isn't coldness, it is the profound exhaustion of living in contradiction. And this internal migration, silent as it is, transmits a signal. People feel it in their bones before their minds can name it. When the chase for approval ends, your behavior alters in ways nearly impossible to fabricate. You listen with a depth that makes others feel heard, perhaps for the first time. Your words become deliberate, measured. You feel no urge to defend yourself against every misinterpretation or to prove your worth in every interaction. This restraint is interpreted not as aloofness, but as a grounded confidence, the kind that comes from knowing your own coordinates. Most people operate with a subconscious program constantly running. Do they like me? This code shapes their decisions, opinions, and very identity. When someone exits that loop, when they act from internal authority rather than external permission, it creates a ripple in the social fabric. It disrupts the rhythm everyone else is unconsciously dancing to. Living by your own code introduces a potent consistency. Your words and actions align. Your boundaries stop shifting like sand with each new person. You neither agree to avoid conflict nor rebel to gain attention. You choose with intention. And intentional people stand out in a culture addicted to reaction. This is where the attention germinates, not because you seek it, but because you've become an enigma. People can't easily discern what you want from them because you don't want anything that would compromise your core. This absence of need creates a space, a vacuum, and into that vacuum, curiosity and observation flow. Something deeper is also at work. When you quit the approval chase, you cease outsourcing your self-worth. You no longer use external praise or criticism as your emotional thermostat. Your inner weather becomes stable. This emotional independence is rare. It signals reliability. Humans are wired to detect stability as it hints at leadership, competence, and survival. In any tribe, the individual least desperate for validation often wields the most subtle influence, not through domination, but through being an anchor. They don't sway with every opinion storm. That steadiness draws the eye like a fixed point in a swirling landscape. Discipline is the silent engine here. When you start honoring your values with consistency, you make choices others know in their quiet hours they should be making. You rise earlier. You protect your time. You say no cleanly. You tolerate less nonsense. You invest energy where it matters, not merely where it's easy. None of this requires a billboard. It manifests in your posture, in the timing of your speech, in the quality of your presence. Here lies the uncomfortable rub. Your discipline quietly exposes the cost of their comfort. Your refusal to bend highlights the places they've contorted themselves. You don't have to judge them. Your example holds up the comparison. Thus, attention arrives, often laced with tension. Testing begins subtly at first. They'll nudge at boundaries you once left porous. They'll cloak pointed comments in humor. They'll wait for the old you to appear. And when you don't perform, when you remain calm and firm, their notice intensifies. Not because you created drama, but because you refused to. There is something profoundly destabilizing about a person who doesn't require being liked to remain kind, who can disagree without hostility, who can exit a situation without burning the bridge. This fusion of strength and restraint defies easy categorization, so they watch, trying to solve you. What they are truly observing is the authenticity of your change. Will you crack under pressure? Will you apologize for your boundaries? Will you trade your values for acceptance when loneliness bites? If you do, they can exhale. The social order remains intact. If you don't, if you stay aligned even when it costs you, something changes permanently. You become a reference point, a standard, someone against whom others measure themselves, often without realizing it. And that is when being overlooked becomes an impossibility. This presence isn't born of charisma or title. It springs from coherence, the rare, resonant alignment between what you believe, what you say, and what you do. People sense this alignment instinctively. They may not applaud it, they may resent it, but they will recognize it. The ultimate irony? It all begins with the most private of vows, to live honestly, to act in ways you can respect when utterly alone. To cease performing and start becoming. The world responds to that not with silence, but with profound attention. Because when you stop chasing approval and start building a life, you don't fade into the backdrop. You step out of it, and people, whether they appreciate it or not, must adjust their focus. Meaningful change doesn't just alter your own trajectory, it quietly unsettles the psychological ecosystem around you. Growth has a way of doing that. It forces uninvited comparisons, holds up a mirror no one requested but everyone feels. Most people avoid seeing themselves as stagnant. They craft comforting narratives. Life was unfair, timing was off, someone else was to blame. These stories aren't necessarily lies, but they are shields protecting the ego from a more brutal truth, that perhaps responsibility was declined. Then you appear changed, not preaching, not louder, just different, more grounded, more intentional. And suddenly their narrative feels flimsy. You didn't get a special permit to improve. You didn't wait for perfect conditions. You worked within the same messy reality they inhabit. That fact alone cracks the foundation of their excuses. This is why genuine growth feels confrontational, even in silence. Your progress becomes a silent, persistent question aimed at others. If you can take ownership of your life, what does that say about my choices? That question is agonizing. It highlights the chasm between who someone is and who they sense they could be. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. It often manifests as irritation, defensiveness, or a low-grade resentment. So instead of engaging with the question, they reframe your growth to preserve their self-concept. You got lucky. You're being extreme. You've changed for the worse. You think you're superior. These interpretations are not about you. They are attempts to shatter the mirror, because mirrors don't just reflect success. They reflect foregone opportunities, dormant potential, and the steep price of comfort. This reaction frequently comes from those once closest to you, people who were comfortable with the former version because it didn't challenge them. You shared an unspoken language of limits, complaints, and shared frustrations. When you step outside that dialect, even gently, the relational dynamics tremble. Not everyone can accommodate that shift. Your growth rewrites the rules. Old jokes fall flat. Shared complaints now feel heavy and hollow. Your non-participation in familiar patterns is felt not as judgment, but as a form of quiet rejection. Hence the watchfulness. It's not admiration. It's uncertainty. They are waiting to see if this is a phase, if you'll come back to your senses, if the mirror will cloud over on its own. Because as long as you remain consistent, as long as you choose responsibility over comfort, the reflection remains clear. Herein lies the paradox. The calmer you are, the more intense the reaction can be. If you were arrogant or mean, they could dismiss you easily. But you're not. You're composed, respectful. You've simply stopped participating in the collective avoidance. This makes the mirror impossible to ignore. People will project their inner conflict onto you. Their self-criticism morphs into criticism of your motives. Their guilt becomes suspicion. Their envy transforms into moral indignation. This is rarely conscious. It's a defense mechanism, a way to externalize discomfort rather than face it internally. You might notice odd behaviors, passive-aggressive remarks, subtle digs veiled as jokes, sudden coldness, or an intense, probing curiosity about your life. This isn't random. It's the psyche's attempt to restore equilibrium. If they can reduce you back to a known quantity, the mirror loses its power. If you refuse to play along, if you remain steady without growing bitter, a deeper shift can occur. Some will eventually use the mirror correctly. They'll begin asking better questions. They may never thank you, but your example plants a seed of possibility, and that seed, once planted, is hard to uproot. Others will reject the mirror entirely. They'll distance themselves, crafting a story where you are the problem, thereby preserving their own self-image. This is painful but illuminating. It reveals who was invested in your stagnation, not your well-being. This is why growth often walks hand in hand with loneliness. You have broken an unspoken contract, the agreement to stay the same together, to lament without acting, to dream without risk. Breaking that contract carries a social tariff. But the alternative, staying small to spare others discomfort, is a slow, soul-crushing betrayal. It erodes integrity and teaches you to neglect your own potential, a cost that compounds with interest. So when you feel the tension, when you sense the weight of eyes upon you, when interactions shift, understand the mechanics at play. You have become a mirror. And mirrors don't create flaws, they reveal what was already there. Your duty is not to break the mirror or apologize for its clarity. Your duty is to remain honest, disciplined, and kind. Let people see what they are ready to see. Release the rest. For growth is not an assault on others, it is a solemn promise to yourself. And the discomfort it sparks in others speaks volumes about the internal battles they are waging and very little about the path you are walking. What truly unnerves people is not spectacle, conflict, or open aggression. Those are familiar scripts. They can be countered, dismissed, or fought. The real disruption begins when you become hard to predict while remaining utterly grounded, when you stop reacting on cue, when you no longer fit the role they had neatly assigned you in their mental theater. For a long time, people may have possessed a manual for you. Press here for guilt. Say that to trigger explanation. Use this tone to elicit compliance. So much of social navigation, especially in unbalanced dynamics, depends on this predictability, not on trust or respect, but on reliable emotional responses. Then the script changes. You don't explode when provoked. You don't scramble to justify yourself. You don't contort to keep the peace. You pause, you consider, you choose. That pause is a revolutionary act. It breaks the rhythm. Unpredictability paired with stability is a rare and potent combination. Chaos is easily dismissed. Volatility, even if calm, is still volatility. But calm restraint, that is something entirely different. It signals you are no longer driven by impulse or fear, but by principle. And principles cannot be manipulated like emotions. Those who rely on subtle forms of control, through guilt, obligation, emotional pressure, unspoken expectations, feel this shift immediately. Their influence thrives on your desire to be liked, needed, or perceived as good. The moment you stop feeding that system, it blinks into panic. This is why you can trigger profound unease without raising your voice or leveling an accusation. Your refusal to be emotionally hijacked removes their leverage. And when leverage vanishes, insecurity floods in to fill the void. The testing commences. Remarks carry a sharper edge. Boundaries are gently pressed. Old dynamics are trotted out like bait, hoping to lure the familiar you back into the ring. This isn't always malicious. It's the groping for safety and familiarity. Your growth threatens that safety. What makes it so destabilizing is that you aren't acting superior or preaching. You're simply unavailable for the old games. This leaves them with one daunting option. If they want peace, they must learn to regulate themselves. And many have never cultivated that skill. So they reinterpret your calm. It becomes arrogance, manipulation, coldness. These labels serve a purpose. They reframe your self-possession as a character flaw rather than a sign of maturity. This way, they avoid the harder, more haunting question: why does this person's peace bother me so much? The truth is, emotional self-regulation is a profound form of power, not over others, but over the self. Anyone who has built their sense of influence on your predictable reactions will feel that power shift. They can no longer steer the interaction. They can't predict the outcome. That uncertainty registers as danger. This is why truly grounded people are often described as intimidating, even when they are gentle. Intimidation doesn't always stem from threat. It arises from opacity, from the inability to easily locate someone's insecurities. When you don't broadcast your vulnerabilities, people don't know where to aim. Crucially, you're not unpredictable due to chaos, but due to consistency. You respond from values, not moods. This means people can't manipulate you by altering the emotional climate of a room. They can't provoke guilt to gain compliance or provoke anger to discredit you. This consistency forces others to confront their own lack of internal structure. They realize, often subconsciously, how heavily they rely on external reactions to guide their own behavior. When those reactions cease, they feel untethered. Hence the observation. They study your tone, your timing, your silences. They are trying to decode the new rules. But the rules aren't new. They're simply unfamiliar to a reactive world. Do not mistake this reaction for pure hostility. It can be fear, admiration laced with resentment, or the discomfort of realizing old methods have expired. The common source is a loss of control. Here, many make a critical error. They soften themselves to ease the tension. They over-explain, over-reassure, dull their own clarity to make others comfortable again. While understandable, this comes at a steep price. It teaches others that your boundaries are negotiable under social pressure. True maturity lies in tolerating the discomfort your growth causes without becoming cruel or apologetic. You need not punish people for feeling unsettled, nor must you rescue them from that feeling. Their discomfort is instructive. It carries information about their own inner state. Your task is not to be predictable in the ways that comfort others. Your task is to be reliable in the ways that earn your own respect. That means acting in alignment with your principles even when the social feedback is awkward or tense. When you do this, the triggering effect eventually fades for some. They adapt, they learn, they rise to meet the new dynamic. For others, it intensifies. They may double down on control or withdraw completely. Both outcomes are clarifying, so if you notice people reacting oddly to your calm, your boundaries, your quiet resolve, understand the machinery at work. You have stepped out of emotional servitude. You are no longer governed by provocation. And that freedom, serene as it may be, shakes the very foundations of systems built on your compliance. Stay grounded. Stay consistent. Let your unpredictability spring from principle, not impulse. That is the presence that cannot be controlled, and that is precisely why it holds such power. There arrives a day when you realize your invisibility cloak has dissolved, not with fanfare, but through a series of subtle feedback loops. Your words are met with a deeper silence of consideration. Your absence is noted, your presence felt before you speak. This is the mark of becoming consequential. For years, you may have existed in the margins, reliable, pleasant, unassuming. That existence feels safe but renders you interchangeable. When nothing you do seems to ripple, no one is compelled to pay attention. Consequence changes the equation. It emerges when your actions reliably produce outcomes. People learn through repeated experience. When you commit, things happen. You follow through. Your yes means yes, your no means no. This consistency teaches a powerful lesson. You are a force that affects your environment. Attention then arrives not as fleeting curiosity, but as sustained awareness. People begin to factor you into their calculations because your choices impact the shared space. If you speak, directions may shift. If you withdraw, a tangible gap appears. If you stand firm, a line is drawn. This makes you a variable that can no longer be discounted. Becoming consequential doesn't require a title or a platform. It requires reliability. It demands that your internal compass dictates your actions more than external pressure does. When people realize you cannot be easily swayed by peer pressure or emotion, they begin to adjust their own behavior around you. They may not enjoy it, but they account for you. You'll see it in subtle shifts. Your opinion is solicited with greater weight. There's a hesitation before your views are dismissed. People glance at you to gauge reaction before proceeding. Even your silence acquires meaning. This is not an accident. It is the dividend of accumulated credibility. Credibility is built in the private, unseen moments, in doing the right thing when no one is watching, in choosing integrity over convenience, in owning your mistakes without deflection. These acts compound silently. One day, you discover the investment has matured. To be consequential also means your absence creates a vacuum. When you step back, standards may dip, energy may falter, a certain rigor may fade. This is both affirming and sobering. It means you matter. And mattering brings responsibility. Some mishandle this, mistaking consequence for dominance, seeking control. That kind of power is brittle and short-lived. Authentic consequence is quieter. It doesn't need to assert itself. It is respected because it has been earned. Not everyone welcomes your newfound weight. Some feel reassured and lean into your stability. Others feel threatened. They preferred you when you were easier to ignore, when your presence didn't require them to adjust their own stance. Their discomfort often manifests as heightened scrutiny. They will examine your motives, hunt for hypocrisy. This isn't always malicious. It's a natural response to someone who has become relevant. Relevance invites evaluation. Your response to this evaluation is pivotal. You become defensive, you dilute your power. If you become performative, you sacrifice your credibility. The only sustainable path is to remain aligned, to continue doing the very things that made you consequential in the first place. There is a deeper layer. To be consequential means your actions now serve as signals. Others observe not just what you do, but what you tolerate, what you ignore, what you champion. Your boundaries become reference points. Your standards quietly sculpt the culture. This is why self-respect is non-negotiable. Compromise it and the consequences ripple outward. Uphold it and you give others permission or provide a provocation to rise to meet that standard. Understand that being consequential is not about ego inflation. It's about effectiveness. It's about carrying your portion of the collective weight so well that your removal would create an imbalance. This brings a certain solitude. You can't hide in carelessness anymore. Your mistakes carry more weight, but so does your discernment. Your margin for nonsense shrinks drastically. At this stage, the temptation to retreat into invisibility can be strong, to shed the pressure to avoid the eyes. But that would be a betrayal of the very discipline that delivered you here. Instead, you must learn to accept the weight, carry it without complaint. Understand that this attention is not a prize, but a byproduct, a sign that your life is now integrated enough to cast a shadow, to affect the world beyond your immediate skin. So if you feel the gaze upon you now, if you sense your movements are being tracked, do not be alarmed. You haven't erred. You've evolved into someone whose choices carry weight. And once that is true, to ignore you is to ignore a law of physics. You have become, for better or worse, a fact of their landscape. A powerful temptation arises once you sense this shift. To soften, to explain, to make yourself more digestible, to ease the pressure. The instinct is deeply human. We are wired for belonging, and standing apart can trigger primal alarms. But this is the precise juncture where shrinking inflicts the deepest wound. When people begin watching you, it signifies you've crossed an internal frontier. You've ceased living primarily for comfort and begun living for coherence. Your actions resonate with your values often enough that the vibration is felt by others. To now try to revert to being harmless and unnoticed isn't humility, it's a betrayal of your own awakening. Self-respect possesses a specific fragility. It crumbles the moment you abandon it to restore another's comfort. You can recover from public failure. You can learn from mistakes. But when you consciously lower your own standards for the sake of social ease, an inner witness marks it down. And that witness does not forget. The discomfort you're experiencing is not a warning that you've gone too far. It's evidence that you've gone far enough to be real, to be felt. People are reacting because your presence no longer molds itself to fit their expectations. You're no longer absorbing their chaos, their projections, their unresolved emotions. You are standing on your own ground. That forces everyone around you to reorient their own footing. To them, this feels like an unfair change in the rules, a game they didn't agree to play. But growth does not require a consensus. It requires commitment. And commitment always exacts a social price. If you retreat now, if you blunt your edges, if you start apologizing for the space you occupy, you teach a perilous lesson that pressure works. That discomfort can make you fold. And once that lesson is learned, it will be applied again and again. Staying disciplined in this phase doesn't mean rigidity or cruelty. It means precision. It means choosing your words as if they become permanent. It means allowing misunderstandings to exist without rushing to correct everyone, not from a place of spite, but from a respect for truth. Those who genuinely wish to understand you will ask. The others are not owed a dissection of your soul. This is where many conflate self-respect with arrogance. Arrogance demands recognition. Self-respect is recognition of the self by the self. Arrogance needs to be seen as right. Self-respect needs to be right with itself. One seeks dominance over others, the other seeks integrity within. You don't need to perform strength. You need to practice it daily. Strength reveals itself as consistency over time, as restraint when reaction is the easier path, as honesty when silence would be safer, as silence when words would only fuel a drama that isn't yours. Come to this understanding, the watching is not about you personally. It is about what you represent, the possibility of agency, the reality of change, the quiet revolution of self-ownership. You are a walking question. Let them sit with it. Your only task is to live the answer.